Good morning and welcome to the Closer's Inner Circle podcast with your host, Denise Griffitts and Bengay III. Today we are in week 6 and we are continuing our very much in-depth exploration of the Sales Infiltration chapter from the Closers Part 2. Now this is a multi-part series. We've talked about it before last year, but we didn't do it in kind of a series format, which we thought was pretty important. And it's designed to provide a masterclass in advanced sales strategies. And we're offering listeners actionable, write that down, actionable insights to elevate their sales approach and transform their careers. So we really want you to prepare for maximum impact from these conversations that Ben and I are having. So before diving into week 6, take a moment to catch up on weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And because these foundational episodes provide essential context and insights from the powerful strategies being discussed, and that helps us ensure that you get the most out of this series. And those links are in the podcast show notes. And additionally, this is important to maximize your learning experience and gain as much sales wisdom, as possible. Make sure you have the closers part 1 and part 2, and I'll have Ben tell you where to find those. Ben, it's Wednesday. Good morning.
Good morning, young lady. How are you?
I am peachy.
Well, I'm thrilled to know that you are okay. Those of us who listen to the news and try and keep up on things were led to believe Louisiana had been wiped out by tornadoes.
Yeah, never happened.
Yeah, and well, it probably did where they touched down.
In Mississippi, it did. Here, we didn't even have rain. I was getting emails and texts like, "Denise, are you okay?" I was like, "What? Why wouldn't I be? I'm in the yard. I'm digging holes. I'm fine." But
I
it
don't think of all my friends around the world when I hear about problems in their area and I reach out to make sure they're okay. I'm not sure I've ever contacted anybody who was in the midst of whatever I heard about. The hurricane missed them. It's not raining there. They've never seen a tornado in their life. They've never felt an earthquake. And I said, it was just on the news. I don't know
right.
where they are.
I know. I
So
think I told you this. If we see Jim Cantor threatening to come to Louisiana, we just go, oh, geez, because it's never as bad as he says it's going to be. And I'll be honest with you, I don't pay attention to him or the weather podcast, any of it. I watch my dog. My
yeah,
dog knows what's going on. If she gets squirrely, I'm like, okay, but let's close the windows, close the doors, put everything in the garage. Come on, let's go. But the dog knows a whole lot better than any weather channel does.
when I was young and still living at home, they would announce on the television it's going to rain or whatever. And my mother, who had rheumatoid arthritis, would be sitting on the couch, usually sprawled out, reading her newspaper. And she'd put the paper down and say, no, it's not.
Exactly.
And she was always right. If her joints were aching, rain was possible. If she was really hurting, rain was certain. If she wasn't hurting, it was not going to rain. And there was never a time when she was wrong and the weatherman was right. And he's got radar and this and that and so on, but he didn't have my mother's hands.
Exactly. And I went and looked and went, okay, let me go find out what's going on. And it's like, oh, we're going to have tornadoes, we're going to have winds, we're going to have none of it happened. Now, maybe somewhere else in Louisiana, I don't know. Here, we were fine. We were running around in shorts and flip-flops. Never happened.
Happy,
And
happy.
oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So well, I know you said in the virtual green room you've got some questions. So let's get those sorted out because people love to hear when you, in particular, when you answer those questions, they're waiting. They're waiting breathlessly for them.
Breathlessly? Wow.
Yes, I know. It's true though.
Well, I have one here from a nice gentleman named Ray Webb, Webb, and he said, because I guess I've talked about it here, but I also talk about it lots of other places. He says you're always talking about the power of public speaking. I'm going to paraphrase what he said because it's long, but the gist of it was you're always talking about the power of public speaking. and whether I do it or not. And he said, I have no intention of doing it because it scares me to death, which is a good open reaction on Ray's part because public speak, I have read. I've always argue with people who quote studies from Harvard and 98% of all people believe this and so on. But I have read, and I think I've read it often enough to believe it's probably true, that public speaking is the number one psychological fear there is among all people. Ahead, I read in one study, ahead of death by fire, which I found rather interesting. And it doesn't make you a good person or a bad person. I love public speaking, but I remember when I was afraid. And I also remember times that have popped up that were frightening. We were in Norway doing a series of seminars and speeches. And I think the biggest crowd was almost 20,000 people. And then as we were getting ready to wrap up and fly back, but we had another day or two to go in Oslo, my friend and sponsor, Derek Broughton, said, Ben, would you do me a favor? This isn't in the schedule, but I have a little group that I belong to. And it was I don't know what they call themselves, but the gist of it, it was the Oslo Junior Chamber of Commerce. And I said, sure. And he had just seen me speak to 20,000 people like they were all in my living room. There's the power of the big group. I love from about 1,000 up, it becomes an oil painting. There's no reason to fear them. Somewhere in 1,000 people or 20,000 people, there'll be enough people who think you're funny and laugh at the right times and give you a standing ovation, whether you deserve it or not. The smaller the crowd, the iffier it gets. So we we go to a hotel, walk into the room. He said they're meeting upstairs, and we went up a flight of steps and walked in. And I'm guessing there were 12 people sitting at a horseshoe-shaped table. And my heart started beating like it did when I first started speaking many years ago. I thought, oh, that's what that fear of public speaking is they're talking about. Because with 12 people, somebody can say, that's nonsense. Or let me ask you a question and throw you off. And they're more inclined to do that in a small group than in front of a big group. So I understand the fear of public speaking. However, here's why you ought to do it. One, it's a confidence builder. I taught my People Builders program at San Quentin, California's infamous state prison, San Quentin, for 5 years, once a week for 12 hours, 6 in the evening till 6 Saturday morning, and taught it again at Lompoc, the federal penitentiary, for a little over 6 years. And it was about how to get out of prison and stay out of prison and build the way life really works and so on. What it really was a public speaking class because they had to come to the front of the room to explain what they learned in last week's lesson or what they were learning on a day-to-day basis or how they applied it and so on. But because I kept it conversational, they didn't realize what I was really up to. I was building their confidence to stand up in front of a few hundred people and share their thoughts. And when that confidence level kicked in, other things in their life began to change. Um, I think I've told you this, but when I got to San Quentin and taught the first class there, I was given some facts. Here's what you're up against. And one of them was that the recidivism rate, get out of prison, you're back in prison, in 2 years was 67%. I assume that was all over California, but at San Quentin, the recidivism rate was 67%. 67% of all people who got out of prison were back in 2 years. The graduates of People Builders, which was a 12-week course, although many people just stayed in and repeated and repeated. I had people in the first class that were in my last class 5 years later. But anyway, once we had run People Builders at San Quentin long enough to have 2-year statistics, we discovered an interesting thing. Instead of 67% recidivism rate, ours was just under 5%. And the difference was, there were numerous things. I actually shared some good information with them and told them the way life really worked and so on. But the real difference was they weren't uh, they weren't scared anymore. And a lot of the toughest guys you ever saw in prison were scared to death. They were 250-pound little boys because they were insecure. They didn't have an education. They came from a broken home. They had a drug and or alcohol background, etc. So, and the turnaround was public speaking. Now back to business, and that is business, by the way. It gives you a confidence level that you don't have until you do it. When I first got it started in public speaking officially in about 1965 in Holiday Magic Cosmetics, Zig Ziglar had joined the same company on the same day in the same meeting. And although he hadn't had a big hit yet, we both started making serious money September 15th, 1965 on. He did have a background in public speaking. He was raised in the church. So if you're a Southerner from the South, you know one of two things, maybe both. You know how to speak in public because you've been asked to do it, to give your testimony, and you know how to sing because singing in the South in church is a big part of it. Whether you can do it well or not isn't the issue. You still sing. And Zig told me, I said, I need to get to the front of the room and become an authority figure. How do I do that? He said, speak everywhere you possibly can. Certain local service organization who might want to hear about our business, whatever. But if two or more are gathered together, give your presentation. Bill Gove, one of the early powers in modern public speaking, used to say that when he opened the refrigerator and the light went on, he did 5 minutes. And Zig used to tell people after he told me to speak everywhere and anywhere, and I followed his advice and started doing it. I spoke to Rotary and Kiwanis and youth groups, and anybody would put a few people in the room. I was right there talking. Wasn't getting paid. That was the second layer of that lesson. But I was right there talking, and Zig started telling people Ben Gay would work a traffic accident. I was talking to a friend the other day who said he would be, in the early days, he'd be willing to work a grass fire. So the trick is get up, get up, get up. There are great books on public speaking. I encourage you to read them. Dale Carnegie had one or two out just on that subject. I think Napoleon Hill did. W. Clem Stone, Combined Insurance, I think, had a book out on the subject. But there are lots of them, and you can read them and you can pick up tips. But it's like you can't go to a seminar to learn how to ride a bicycle. You got to get on the bicycle. So start out small. The first time I spoke in public, I introduced another more experienced speaker, and all I did was stand up and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Dempsey," and sat down. And that was about my entire repertoire at that time. So, but then I built it and built it and built it. I used to travel with William Penn Patrick, the owner of Holiday Magic Cosmetics. And my first introductions of him were, ladies and gentlemen, the chairman of the board, the president of Holiday Magic Cosmetics, William Penn Patrick. And I'd sit down. Then I started adding on to my introduction. And after several months, maybe a year, Bill said to me one day, "Ben, we're going to start traveling separate frequently. You can do your seminar, I can do mine. It doesn't take both of us to fill a room now that we can, either one of us can fill a room." And I said, "Yeah, but all I'm doing is introducing you." He said, "Have you noticed that your introduction of me has become as long as my talk?"
You hadn't no so I'm picturing it. You hadn't noticed it?
Well, I knew I was speaking longer, but I didn't realize I was doing an hour to introduce his hour.
Oh,
So we started, it was a compliment, but it was a funny compliment. So I started doing my own, and he was right. If Ben Gay was coming to town, I could fill a room just fine. And by then I was president of the company and so on. But I started out with, ladies and gentlemen, William Penpatrick. Then I added the president and chairman of the board of Holiday Magic, William Penpatrick. And then and my good friend, and somehow that grew into an hour or so. So it gives you an authority thing. And then if you're selling or working locally, in my case, it was confidence building. I didn't need to become the star of Atlanta in those days or Placerville, California now. It was confidence building. But let's say you live in Detroit and you sell something there. Most of your business life is in around Detroit. If you're the guy at the front of the room, introducing people in the beginning, then talking about business or whatever you've learned and building your inventory and repertoire, you can become the guy in Detroit or the guy or girl in Charlotte, North Carolina. You become, and they say, I need a speaker for this thing. Well, you ought to get Denise Griffitts. She really knows her stuff. And I saw her speak the other day and she did a great job and so on. So it builds credibility. Let's say you sell cars. You get up at the Rotary Club and you show them the ins and outs of buying a car. Give them some behind the scenes stuff to give them information and confidence when they go to buy their car. That's fine, and that builds your credibility. But it also builds when someone says, I'm looking for a new car. They say, check with Ben Gay. He spoke at our group the other day and he really knows the business. In fact, he gave me a business card here, and I give them 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 business cards. If they come up after the seminar and show any interest in what I do and how I do it and want to know more, I make sure I write my cell phone number on the back of the card I give to them. And then I say, hand out some of these. You must have friends who bought a car or gonna buy a car. And who is that? Everybody 16 or older.
right.
So, it's not a question of if they're going to buy a car. They've already bought one and they're going to buy another one, or they're getting ready to buy their first one. Or in my case, because I've given so many away as prizes, whoever sold me my first car should have stayed in close touch because I went on to buy lease over 600 luxury cars. And by the way, I was in a position to give those away because of my knowledge of public speaking. I became president of Holiday Magic Cosmetics, then the largest direct sales MLM in the world, because I could speak in public and because I overheard William Penpatrick say to one of our business associates, while watching my video, I had done a video that morning in a training class. I walked in behind them. They didn't know I was there. I wasn't sneaking around. They just didn't hear me on the carpet. And as William Penpatrick, while looking at my video, said, he's good. And I will pay more for the ability to effectively communicate than any other talent. And I've told you the story. I sort of did the moonwalk out of the room so they wouldn't know I was there. But now that I knew what he would pay the most for, I went to it. I started doing that. Quick little side story. I caught the bug earlier than I realized, 5 years earlier than when I had to speak. When I got thrown out of high school, then I got thrown out of the prep school I was sent to, and was back in the public high school. And Ms. Griffin, my senior English teacher, apparently had heard about my reputation. because I came skidding into the room late. I went to the wrong room and then noticed I was in a classroom full of midgets. I was a senior, they were eighth graders. And so I arrived in her room late. When I went skidding in, since I was the class clown, voted wittiest, and all that stuff, she knew who I was. I'd never met her, but I came skidding in, and everybody in the room laughed. They thought I was late to be funny. And she said, "Mr. Gay, I presume." And I thought, oh, this is not good. I'd hoped to go the whole year and have her not know my name. So I said yes, and she got up, grabbed one of those all-in-one classroom seats, with a desk built in and the chair and the place to put your books under the seat, pulled it around next to her desk, facing the class, and she said, "You're going to sit here this year." And I thought, God, this is within arm's reach of a woman with a reputation of being the meanest teacher on earth.
She
So
wasn't
I
a
said,
nun, was she? Because they have
no, but
rulers
you could have put a nun's outfit on her and it would have
and a
fit.
ruler.
Yeah, the
Just
only
they
thing
they
she didn't have
skewer
was
you.
a ruler to hit me
Ow.
with. But she said, and then we had a private moment before class was over. She said, "Mr. Gay, you are going to win the state writing championship." She'd never seen me write a word, but you're going to win the state writing championship and you're going to speak at graduation. And I thought, win the state writing championship? I don't think so. And then speak at graduation, I almost had to stifle a laugh because to me that was valedictorian or salutatorian, and there wasn't a chance of me being either. I didn't know she had the power over who wrote, memorized, and gave the invocation, the prayer. And so, sure enough, come June of that year at the Atlanta Municipal Auditorium, I came from my seat down the steps to the lectern, held out my hands as she had taught me, and gave the all rise sign. And 3,000 people stood up. And I remember thinking, I like this. I like this feeling. Turned out it was a few years before I was doing it again to large groups, but nevertheless, I was hooked. And then I
Right.
delivered the talk, and I heard myself with a feedback in a microphone for the first time. I'd memorized the prayer and I got through it flawlessly. Um, so I remember liking the sound. It seemed more impressive to hear that eighth of a second delay coming back. I loved having 3,000 people stand up on my command. And I was just a bomb ready to go off. And then Holiday Magic set it off. So the power of public speaking, Ray Webb, gives you confidence, gives you credibility, and although I love Dale Carnegie, etc., there's lots of them out there. The good news is it's almost free to get into a good group. There's a Toastmasters in your town, and it costs little or nothing, $30 a year, or have lunch or something. Toastmasters would be a great place to start. Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, third, fourth richest men in the world, says he sets it up in talks so that people will ask the right question. But he said, everybody wants to know what my best investment that I ever made was. And everybody, gets out their pens and paper and go, yeah. What is it? He said, I invested in myself and paid to go to the Dale Carnegie public speaking class.
Right. I remember that. You
The
told me.
the best investment he ever made. So if it's Warren Buffett's best investment and I'm recommending it, and there's a Toastmasters in your town, and there is, unless you're living in a cave somewhere outside of a small village, join, if nothing else, join Toastmasters. I sent three of my one son I met when I was teaching public speaking, people builders at Lompoc federal prison. So I taught him there. He didn't have to go to Dale Carnegie. My other three sons, I paid to have go to Dale Carnegie. Among the reasons being, they don't listen to dad. but the
No, say
but
it ain't
the
so.
yeah.
Who
And
listens
and
to their
they would
parents?
come back from a class different time because they were different age groups, but they come back from a class, "Dad, you won't believe what he said. He says if you set a goal and, blah, 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 and so on," and they start giving me my seminar back to me. And I'm thinking, I paid $1,500 per kid to have them teach me what I taught them at dinner for free.
But
I
they
was
don't
get
listen. They seriously,
Yeah,
I never heard a word my parents said.
of course not. I got up to speak in Ripon, California, the almond. Notice I didn't say almond because in almond country, they have those things that shake the tree. And I say, it's almond, isn't it? No, it's almond. We
That's
shake
like
that.
here, it's not pecan. You hear me?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
is not. It's pecan. If you say
right.
it wrong, I'm not feeding you. Go away.
Well, they say with those things that shake them out into the baskets they have beneath the tree, that they shook the L out of the almonds. So anyway, I'm getting up to speak, and I've been introduced, standing ovation, and just as they go to sit down, I heard about this later. Young Ben the fourth, is slipping out the back door. Yeah, there was some kids out in a parking lot or a playground or something he wanted to go be with, and this guy said, "Young man, aren't you going to listen to your dad's seminar?" He said, "Sir, I live in a seminar."
It's true, but he still had to go to Dale Carnegie.
Yeah,
You raised a couple of points. You didn't see me raising my hand going, me, me. But two things. One of the, we're talking about public speaking. And listen, I have to make a plug for podcasting. I have to, because podcasting is its own form of public speaking. And people who
absolutely.
speak well or are articulate, intelligent, they're passionate, they're curious, get on a podcast, get on a bunch of podcasts, eventually start your own because it is, well, you've heard me say this many times before, podcasting is marketing 101.
Absolutely.
Public speakers have a natural advantage because podcasting is all about voice. Now, yeah, a lot of people doing videos, you'll never see me doing that. To me, it is all about the voice. So you already, if you're doing a lot of speaking to your refrigerator, which I love, I go stick my head in there to calm down. That's my meditation spot. I stick my head in there and cool down. But you're already speaking, you're already talking. Do more of
Yeah.
it and get on podcasts. Have a topic that people like me will go, ooh, tell me more. Get on
And
podcasts.
if you're doing a podcast audio only like you do,
Yeah.
if it's visual video, then you're looking at the person you're talking to, so it's somewhat easier. On audio only, I learned a great trick from my friend Johnny Hyde, the great disc jockey, first person to play Beatles music in the United States, and the producer of Monster Mash, which you hear a lot at Halloween, and Wipeout, two of the great songs of that era. He did them both and worked with Jerry Lewis and MDA and so on. But I said, Johnny, how do you keep that personality going? He worked for me as a salesperson, and I'd heard him on the radio, and like everyone who ever listened to him would say, I felt like he was talking just to me.
Right.
And he said, well, I figured out who my audience is. It's 13-year-old girls, and they send their pictures in. So he said, I always have one he had where he cut a hole in the picture and stuck the microphone through that hole. So he was talking to a young lady who was about 18 inches away from his face, her picture was, and the microphone was coming out of her mouth. And he said, I talked to her during the entire show. Thousands of people are listening. He beat Rush Limbaugh when he was in this area, and the guy with the cowboy hat, whose name has temporarily,
Imus or something.
yeah, Don Imus.
Yeah,
Yeah,
never could stomach him, but keep
yeah.
going.
Well, he beat Imus and Rush Limbaugh in the Sacramento market
Oh, wow.
whenever they were head to head. So he was good. But that was his secret for personalization. He had a good personality and all, but he said you can get lost in the studio sitting there by yourself and you can lose your personality. So he said to avoid that, I put up pictures of the people I'm talking to, and I talked. Thousands are listening, but I'm talking to one 13-year-old girl in Sacramento, California.
Right. She was his avatar.
Right.
Listen, as far as I'm concerned, podcasts and public speakers are a match made in heaven.
Yes.
Really, they really are. And my second, when I was waving my arm around, going, me, Zig Ziglar.
Hmm.
I love Zig Ziglar. I know I told you this, but I'll do it again. My car used to love to go to garage sales. I didn't make the decision. The car did it all
No.
by
No.
itself. It just knew where to go early
In the
Saturday
horse
morning.
business, that's called barn sour.
Oh,
The horses run to the barn at 4 o'clock because they know how long the ride you rented is supposed to
oh.
be.
Yeah. Okay, we're leaving now. Bye. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'd be out at the crack of dawn. Yeah, and my house honestly is furnished with what I call antiques, collectibles, and early trash. It's just early stuff that got put out by the side of the road. And I'm, ooh, I can repurpose that. So it's an eclectic mix of stuff in my house. I've got the best
I
wicker
interrupted
basket.
you. Go back to Zig.
Oh,
Listening to him in the car,
yeah, I
probably.
was listening to it too in the car. But anyway, but I was going to tell you, I got this incredible wicker basket. I took it to an antique store and said, what would you give me for this? And they said, oh, about $1,000. And I'm going home now. And I took it back home. It's in my house. But, but I picked up this little plastic binder. It was a square binder. It was the weirdest looking little thing. It was just one of those closed in clamshells practically. And it said 5 cents. I went, "Well, okay, let me go see what this is all about." And there were, I think, six cassette plate tapes in there, and they were by Zig Ziglar. I didn't know what a Zig Ziglar was. I didn't know if that was his name. I didn't know what the heck it was, but it was a nickel, and I could almost afford that, so I bought it. And at the time, I was driving a Cadillac, and it had a tape cassette player in it, given away
Eight
by
track.
no,
Oh.
shut up. No, see, now you're being mean to me. I'm calling your wife. But no, so it had to look. And I pulled over and I popped one in and I was instantly entranced with Zig Ziglar. That was 20 years ago, maybe. I don't even know. I've still got those cassette. I can't play them, but I've still got them. But I was going to tell you, I came across on Audible the other night an Audible book called The Secrets of Closing the Sale. It's 17
Mhm.
hours, and I've been listening to it for the last few days.
That's a big. I had first heard that on records.
Really?
Yeah, originally. It's like
Yeah.
I have the strangest secret here
No, no.
in a record form given to me by Bill Dempsey the day I joined Holiday Magic. He said, you need some additional wisdom. You're young. I think I was 22, 23. He said, you're young. So he gave me a copy of The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale, the record. And it sits right, I have my hand on it now. And then he gave me a copy of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. He said, go home and listen to this record and listen to it on a regular basis and read this book and then read it once a year. And he gave me a copy of Think and Grow Rich. Fast forward, I've become a public speaker in the meantime. I've done reasonably well. I'm in my,
You
I like,
reckon?
huh?
You reckon? I'm
uh,
not being sarcastic. That was sardonic. There's
I'm,
a difference.
I'm sitting in what I call the big house in Marin County. It was big, bigger than I needed, but I was young and excited about my success. Sitting at the big house with two guys I had just hired to work with me. And I told them that story about Bill Dempsey giving me Think and Grow Rich and The Strangest Secret. And these two guys who happened to be named Dr. Napoleon Hill and Earl Nightingale said, well, did they help? Because they were house guests that weekend. Earl was the voice of Holiday Magic and all of our subsidiary companies. And Dr. Hill had been retained to be my personal mentor. So one of them said, "Did they help?" And I did this Jack Benny look. For you young people, he was known for his long stares and dry humor. I did the Jack Benny stare around my house, out through the windows, over to San Francisco Bay, and across 156 acres of pasture that surround the house. And I would have sat there forever doing that, but finally they got it. They cracked up. They said, "Yeah, I guess it did." So the gift I got within moments, I can tell you, it was the meeting started at noon and it ran an hour because it was scripted. So I was handed The Strangest Secret and Think and Grow Rich at about 1:10 p.m. on Wednesday, September 15th, 1967, at in 1965, at 1447 Peachtree Street, Suite 300. Three people in the room: Bill Dempsey, Zig Ziglar, who'd answered the same ad I had, and my running buddy, Jimmy Rucker. There are very few things in my life I can nail down to the minute, to the location, everything. But it was when I got Dr. Hill's information and Earl Nightingale's information. Cute story about Earl Nightingale. When we were all starting out, Zig was asking $300 for a talk. Adjusted for inflation, that'd be 3,000 today. And obviously, he went well beyond that. I wasn't asking anything. And Earl was asking 500 for a talk, which is a significant, adjusted for inflation, a big difference between 300 and 500. And then when everybody got their nerve up and went to 500, he went to 1,000. When they got their nerve up and went to 1,000, he went to 1,500, 2,000, 2,500. And I said to him one day, "Earl, what's with the price increases?" He said, "Ben, I hate public speaking. I'm a radio guy. I like to sit
Oh,
in my booth and read a script or philosophize or whatever." He said, "I'm trying to find the price at which they won't hire me."
did he ever find it?
I don't think so.
I wouldn't think so either.
His
It was Earl
wisdom,
Nightingale. Pay the
yeah,
guy.
yeah, his wisdom and voice were so profound that, I'm not sure there was a price he could reach, but he was always ahead of us, trying to get out of the business, which I found humorous.
Yeah, I
Great guy.
remember you telling me years ago that you considered him, and I maybe he was largely considered to possess the voice of God.
Yes,
Never
when he talked
forgotten
to you.
that. Yeah.
Well, listen to The Strangest Secret. You can find it on the internet
Oh,
now.
I listen to it all the time. I listen to
Okay,
it
well
on
then
YouTube. Hmm.
Hello, this is
Yep.
Earl Nightingale.
Right. He does have that voice. Years ago, when you told me that, I have cats. Everybody knows I'm not a crazy cat lady yet. I will grow up to be one eventually. But my office, I have to kind of poke my head out to yell at the cats. It's open concept house, but this is a room. This is an actual room. And after you and I had had that conversation about the voice of God, I didn't even lift my head. I didn't poke my head around, and I said something to the cats like, "Get off the counter," in the voice of God, and I heard thump, and down they
She's
went.
serious.
Yeah, dead serious. Of course, it was, my biggest ginger. He's 20 pounds. His name is hashtag Hamilton is an ass. He didn't
Yeah,
like that voice. And every once in a while, I'll pull it out and I'll stick my head around, and he's standing there just frozen, going, "What? What did I do?" He
I
doesn't
have
like it.
we have two cats that have adopted us, one more than the other. He sleeps on the bed frequently and so on. And sometimes he can be like Hamilton the ass. So I got a piece of newspaper, a section of a newspaper, rolled it up, scotch taped it, and I have it beside the bed on my nightstand. And whenever he misbehaves, enough where I care. I mean, cats are always misbehaving, but when he really gets out of line, I pick up that newspaper and boom, he's out of the room. I don't remember if I've ever swatted him with it. Certainly not regular, but it's like your voice, the sight of the rolled up newspaper, and he is had a come to Jesus meeting.
Oh, yeah. I trained all of mine with water bottles when they were babies. And now, even if I don't have a spray bottle handy, all I have to do is pick up my water bottle and shake it, and they're like, boom, and off they go. So it's early training. Okay, you had mentioned something in the virtual green room about scripting, which I'm a firm believer in scripting, and I teach the podcast my podcast mentors, you've got to have scripts. And Ben, every time it freaks them out. It's not the public speaking part of it. It's the scripts. I don't know how to do that. So that's actually a week's worth of training because we have to go through how are they introducing themselves? How are they introducing their guests? How do they keep it honest? I always have a script in front of me. Do I read it out loud? No. It's there to keep me on track and not lose my place in whatever the conversation is. But I'm finding working with these people that they've never heard of scripts or they scare them silly. What do you think?
Well, they don't want to go to the trouble to write one.
There you go.
That looks like work. And they don't want to go to the trouble to memorize one that also looks like work. That's the biggest. And then they've heard you can't give canned sales presentations. Well, you can't give presentations that sound like they're canned. There's a subtle difference between
Yeah.
those two.
And you can't do it on the fly because you will get lost.
Right.
Ask me how I know.
And how do you know?
Oh, geez, my early days. I don't even like to go back and think about some of those because I didn't know about scripting. And once I
Well,
figured out that I better have something in front of me, either on the screen or on index cards, I'm going to rapidly lose my place because, as you and I both do, we have conversations. We're not having interviews, we're having conversations. And it's easy, especially if you're from the South. Something will happen. Oh, yeah, how's your mom and them? Oh, geez, and off you go. Has nothing to do with the conversation. You
I
have
love
you have to
on
have it.
television when an inexperienced newscaster or, guy in the field doing the stand-ups goes up to a Southerner and says, "Well, exactly what was the tornado like?" Or, "How did you feel?" Or some open-ended question. And the Southerner always says something like, "Well, me and the missus, we were there in the bedroom. I had on my blue slippers. Don't normally wear them, but I had on my
Right.
blue slippers." I just start laughing. I said,
Yep, you have to
because
keep it simple, stupid,
yeah,
seriously.
yes or no, frame yes or no questions. But scripting, uh, and we talk about it in the closers part too, in early pages of sales infiltration, which starts on page 257. Best thing I've ever written about selling, explains exactly what a master closer professional salesperson is, does, and how to be one. And scripting is a big part of it. Even what I call like when you do introduce your show, that's it. You may have it memorized, but or
Oh,
you're
it's
reading.
definitely a script,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. I mean,
I mean, I
you
can
say the
flow
same
with
thing.
it, right? I can flow with it, but I don't want to lose track of something really important, and I will if I'm not looking at that script, even though I'm not reading it
Right.
out loud, if that makes any sense.
Sure. So in the closers part two, I sort of criticize the closers part one because it's much closer to the old I say, they say, I say, you say, and so on. But I maintain that our viewers and listeners need to know the basics, know the power of a script. When I'm introduced at a seminar, I say, who's going to bring me up? And it was so and so. I said, send him over. And I hand him the script. I said, read this, please get familiar with it. It's simple, it's only a page and a half, but say that verbatim. And I frequently get, oh, I'll just wing it. And I said, well, if you just wing it, when you say, here's Ben Gay, no one will appear. Because when I know you're not reading the script, I'm leaving. This is not a friendly request, it's a requirement.
Right,
Because
right.
I've worked on that introduction, I know exactly what they need to hear in the most condensed form. And I know that it will, if he reads it without drooling, I'll get a standing ovation. coming up, which gives me my first scripted line, which is, ladies and gentlemen, here he is, Benjamin Franklin Gay the third, and the
Heard.
buildup was good. And I get a
Right.
standing ovation. And as I walk to the microphone or over to the lecture, and I say, all right, let's get this Ben Gay thing out of the way. And they always laugh, but I'm listening carefully to how they laugh because that determines where I go next in the script, or what I have come to call the script chunk, meaning
Right.
I
Right.
don't do, hi, this is Ben Gay, and 37 minutes later finish the script like I used to do and make everybody else do in Holiday Magic. That's been done by other people now. So what we're down to now is our guest star for the day is Ben Gay, and Ben Gay will decide what he talks to you about pretty much based on your reactions back and forth, not unlike Hal Holbrook, who used to do, when he was alive, did Mark Twain. He said he had 9 hours of Mark Twain stories memorized word for word. But he always opened with the same short story. Based on the reaction, he decided where he went in the next 9 hours of material. And based on the reaction to that, he picked the next story. It was like a jukebox, and you're standing in front of it with your quarters. He's saying, "Oh, okay, they want to hear this. Now they want to hear this. Now, but every story he told was word for word. Now, I have some little filler things I use to go from this subject to that subject, of course. And with you, we just chat.
We do. Yeah.
But even with you, if I tell the story about meeting Zig Ziglar for the first time, or doing this, or going here, or doing that, I just told you a quick story about Earl Nightingale and Dr. Napoleon Hill being at my house. That was word for word the way I always tell that story because it's effective, it's tested, and it has become a script chunk. Again, not, hi, Dr. Hill, hi, Earl. Pleasure to talk to you. I'll be chatting with you now for the next 37 minutes on script. Not true. But I will be, if I'm telling you stories, I'll tell you the story the way I found it works best. I've been at this a long time. And Zig, for instance, when you're listening to your Zig tapes, if you had gone to see Zig in person and he had told biscuits, fleas, and pump handles were what he was known for, those three stories in the beginning, they were always word for word. One time he told a new story and that I hadn't heard, it was new to me. And as we were leaving wherever it was, I said, Zig, I hadn't heard that story yet. And he used to give names, this old friend back home, Bubba Smith or whatever. Uh, I said, I hadn't heard that story before. Uh, and you didn't give his name. What's his name? And he said, Ben, I haven't gotten that far yet. He had just made up the story to prove a point.
Right.
He was
Right.
building his script. And after he told it about 3 times, he was going to insert a name, probably a real name, from back home, from back in Columbia or South Carolina, wherever. But scripting is so powerful. And then people say, well, I don't want a canned presentation. I said, do you go to the movies? Yeah. Have you ever seen a John Wayne film, for instance, Robert Redford, whomever? Oh, yeah, yeah. Do you know that they weren't just winging it? They were on script written in most cases by somebody else, but they delivered it word for word. And if they hadn't, the director
Right.
yelled, cut.
Cut. Cut. Exactly right. And I have to tell you, I am living proof that scripting, particularly in podcasting, works. And it dawned on me about a year ago, I guess, because I always do pre-interviews with anybody other than you, because you and I are friends and we know each other very well. But I do pre-interviews and I do about 5 or 6 of those each week because I broadcast Monday and Friday on your Partner in Success Radio. And maybe a year ago, maybe longer, I'd be in the middle of the pre-interview, and I have a little script for that too, because I need to know what they know. Have they ever heard me? I don't want to just load them up with a bunch of stuff that they don't need or care about. And I've gotten to the point where one of the questions I ask is, have you listened to the podcast? If you have, I have a different set of questions for you. If you haven't, that's a whole another thing. Oh yeah, we've listened. And I'll say, okay, so you know how it works. Oh yeah, and they will tell me what they heard. They know what the segments are. They know what the sections are. They know what to expect because it's the same every week.
Yep.
And they're very comfortable with that. And I didn't realize that they were paying attention to how it's crafted, which was comforting to me.
Well, if they even subconsciously want to do a seminar of their own someday, and almost everybody does, millions have, hundreds of thousands anyway, have jumped into the pond. Uh, they're thinking, how can I do it? So they're dialing in, starting to pay attention. When I used to go to Zig's speeches, and I hadn't really done any yet, other than good evening, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's holiday magic meeting, etc. Uh, I went, and my deal was I carried his pump. Remember the old pump he had?
Yeah, the
The,
cast iron one, right?
yeah, well, cast
I
iron
only
in
know
the
this
early
because
days. Yeah,
you've told me the story. That's the only
yeah.
reason I know.
Eventually, it became aluminum and a lot easier to carry. But he carried that prop around because it was part of his talk about how you have to prime the pump and so on. And my job was to carry it in and out of seminars, set it up so he wasn't seen. It was like you didn't want to see Elvis unpacking the tour bus. You know, other people are supposed to do that for him. And I said to Zig one day, "You're not supposed to be carrying that pump around. That makes you look like one of the support people instead of Zig Ziglar." And he says, "Well, how would you suggest I do that?" And I said, "Well, when I'm anywhere near, here's the deal. I'll carry the pump in, I'll set it up, I'll carry it back to the car or whatever the mode of transportation is, in exchange for a front row seat, no charge, and the right to have lunch or dinner before or after each seminar with you so I can take notes. So or learn more. So when I went to a Zig seminar, it wasn't for the joy of carrying his pump. I had decided to be a professional speaker, and I was going to school. Zig, why'd you do that? Why do you kneel down? And he had certain things I don't do. I have never knelt down in my life. Now I don't do it because I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to get back up without help. But it didn't fit me. Uh,
Right.
he was comfortable, like an altar call, getting down on his knees. I was watching Billy Graham this morning, back in the early days, and it was not, frankly, politically correct. And he was doing gestures that he wouldn't do because he got better as time went on and got older. Billy Graham, had he knelt down, probably couldn't have gotten back up towards the end. But I went to the Zig things and carried that stupid pump around. I initiated, let's get it made out of aluminum because I couldn't carry. It was an honest to God pump off of a farm made out of cast iron. And I never weighed it, but I'm guessing it weighed 75 pounds and was an awkward shape. So it wasn't just like a 75-pound box, which is an attention getter. But I was there to learn and just sop it up, sop it up, sop it up. And if I were thinking about a podcast and listening to yours, ours, but yours, uh, I would be taking notes. First, she did this, then she did this, then she did this, then it went off the rails here. How did she get it back on the rails? This is a class.
Sometimes I don't.
Yeah, well,
Sometimes
welcome
I
to the
just
club.
let it go. But
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you're talking about that pump. I think what people don't recall here with other conversations we've had is that Z was probably driving that Rolls Royce at that point, or was he?
Well, remember he didn't. The contest was to be president of the company. That was the mystery
Yeah,
prize.
you got the yeah,
And
you
yeah,
won.
but in the pump days, he wasn't driving the rolls because they hadn't had that contest yet. That was still a
Oh,
year or two
oh,
away.
oh, okay. See, I got my times confused because I know you guys started Holiday Magic at the same day.
Yep.
And then you went, okay, so he got the Rolls Royce after that.
Yeah.
Did you, at that point, since you were the big boss, stop carrying in that pump? I need to know.
Oh, I had quit carrying that pump
Okay.
long before that.
Yeah,
When
75 pounds, I don't love anybody that much.
yeah,
Sorry.
it was like when Bill Patrick said to me, "We can each draw our own crowd. You'll start working separately." It got to the point where I drew as big a crowds as Zig did in the holiday magic world because I was doing well, and Zig and I were the top, and Jimmy Rucker, my partner, were the top two distributors in the country, and everybody knew that. So I didn't need Zig to draw a crowd. Zig didn't need me to draw a crowd, and that got me out of carrying that stupid pumper around. So, yeah, but what Denise is talking about later on, there was a year-long contest. Mystery prize was number one. Number two was a Rolls Royce, et cetera, on down the line. And I beat Zig. Jim and I beat Zig and his partner, Melanius, and I won the mystery prize, become president of the company. Zig won the Rolls Royce. And from time to time, I would talk to Zig as president of the company. I used to love to say to people when Zig was within earshot, how'd you meet Zig? And I said, well, I met him a long time ago, but he works for me now. And I never said that Zig's head didn't jerk just a little bit because he heard it too. But he would call up and I'd say, he's, how you doing? I said, well, I'm having a rough day now that you mentioned that this happened and Chicago is blowing up on us and blah, 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 and so on. And I'd say, Zig, I tell you what, you bring that rolls out here and give me the keys, and I'll give you the keys to the front door of Holiday Magic's international headquarters. And he says, oh no, Ben, you won that fair and square.
I love that
He was
story.
old enough and wise enough to
Yeah.
know
So I
that,
don't want that job. No how.
no, no,
Nobody
thank
know
you.
how. Hey, I wanted to, and I made a note really quickly because we're running out of time. You're talking about school and Mrs. Griffin, and I wanted to know, is she a nun? I have a horrible feeling that we were a lot of like when we were younger and I was in school because I remember my sister when she got to high school walking in the door to her first class and apologizing for knowing me and assuring them that she was nothing like me.
Yeah,
And word got back to me really quickly.
my sister
I have
was
to tell you, I didn't blame her. I
no,
hated school.
my sister is 7 years younger than I am. And so she trailed me through the school system. And although there was some turnover, she had many of my teachers along the way. And she said she would get that reaction. Jane Gay? Huh? Do you have a brother? And she'd go, uh-oh.
Well, my sister just got out in front of it. This is my name and she's my sister and I'm sorry. So
Yeah,
I don't think it was that raw, but she wanted them to know that, they were not going to be treated to my kind of shenanigans. So
yeah.
I think it worked
Oh,
for her, but she did well in school. Me, not so much.
quick story on Ms. Griffin, uh, who it turned out, I found out in later years, she had a first name. To me, it was Miss Griffin or Mrs. I forget what I think it was Miss. In those days, Ms. hadn't happened yet. But anyway, she shaped to a large part my life. I mean, I've written,
No
had a
kidding.
hand in writing 35 books, have sold millions of copies of books that are mine. Some are ghostwritten and so on. And am a public speaker, traveled all over the world, given 5,000 paid appearances, plus probably another 5,000 for prisons and church groups and so on for free. And it all came from Ms. Griffin saying, you're going to win the state writing championship and you're going to speak at graduation. So I'm back in Atlanta visiting Jimmy Rucker one day, my old running buddy and good friend to this day. And I said, "Oh, we went over to the school, Murphy High School. It's called something else now." Went over to the school, walked in. The lady behind the counter said, "Oh my!" And I thought, "Oh my!" I would have thought that would have worn off over the years, but she knew who I was and assumed trouble or laughing was about to start. And so I asked her about this guy. One person who taught me, my senior history teacher, Mr. Evans, was still teaching. So I went back to see him, and he was very gracious and so on. Then I asked about a couple of my favorite teachers, including Ms. Griffin. And the lady said, "I'm not supposed to do this, but she loved you, and here's her number. Give her a call." So I called her at home, told her, reiterated some of the things you and I have talked about today and how much they meant to me and how she changed my life. And I said, "Well, listen, I'll let you go. We were coming up on dinner time." Yeah, hers and mine, I assumed. And she said, "Oh, yes, the rich dine at 7, don't you?" She had heard that perhaps I'd done pretty well. So I said, "Yes," and I said, "I'm really sorry for bothering you at home. You must, get these all the time, but I just wanted to tell you, for me, how much I loved you and the impact." And she said, "Ben, I taught for 40 years. You're the first student who has ever called me."
I love that story. You've
Life
told it to me
changing.
before. I love that
Yeah,
story.
life changing for
Yeah.
thousands of people. I talk to people today who I say, "Do you remember Ms. Griffin?" "Remember her? Oh my God, blah, blah, blah." Thousands of us. One called. And if I hadn't dropped by that school just out of, you know, uh, old time's sake and had that conversation with that secretary who gave me her phone number, I wouldn't have called. She would have gone to her grave without a single student thanking her. We live in a small town, Gigi. There are people around here who went to school with Gigi, taught Gigi. Those are fading, but there's still some around. And she'd say, "Oh, that's so and so taught me English when we first got together 30 years ago." And I'd say, "Go over and tell him how much it meant to you." "Oh, I couldn't do that." "Do it."
Do it. Yeah. See, I would never have the nerve to approach any of my teachers because they didn't like me.
Oh, they probably did in the teacher's room.
Whoa.
Do you know what Denise said today?
Well, listen, this is no joke. For the longest kind of time, I thought Denise was my middle name. I thought Damn was my first name. And that was just like Ms., that damn Denise. I heard it a lot. Now I'm going to hear it in my head all day long. Ben, we have to go. Tell people where they can get the books, The Closers 1 and 2.
Go to, and this is better than going to my website or going to a bookstore. Go to stores, STORES ebay.com /Ronzoni Books, RONZONEBooks. Ronzoni Books, all one word. Prices are lower there, free shipping, which I don't offer. But it still comes to you signed, dated, and carries our unconditional, no questions asked, lifetime money back guarantee. So that's how you do it. Oh, and people say, "Well, how can they sell books cheaper?" Ronzoni is Gigi's maiden name. She owns that company and her jewelry business. And the reason she can do it that inexpensively is she goes into my warehouse and steals the books that she wants to sell.
Oh, and
So
here
her
I was thinking it was just nepotism
now
of a
it's
kind, of a type.
her product cost is significantly lower than mine. I actually have to pay for mine.
Have I mentioned I adore your wife? She is so smart. She really is. Well, listen, everybody, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Closers Inner Circle podcast with your hosts, rather, Denise Griffitts and Bengay the Third. We have a good time every week. And to stay updated on all of our future episodes, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform, Apple, Spotify. You can find us anywhere you consume your favorite podcasts. by going straight to your partner in Success Radio, which hosts this podcast, and subscribe there. Ben, are we going back into part 7 next week?
Uh, yes,
Okay, good. I think we've got several more of these to make it all the way through because even if we're not taking directly from the pages, there are so many memories and tips and tricks that you've got to share that, yeah, and it goes back to scripting. You don't want to just read it from the book and say, well, Ben, what do you think? I mean, to me, this is a lot better for people to read and understand and listen to because they know where you're coming from in that book.
I totally agree with you. And I'm a Southerner. So when I hear one story when you mentioned Zig's pump, that reminds me of five stories. I'm sort of guilty of the guy with a mobile home gone with a tornado. Well, me and the missus.
I'm just as bad. When mentioned Ms. Griffin, I went back to my sister going, I'm nothing like her. Like, whoa. I didn't even have good sense to be hurt by it. I just laughed. But she was right. Well, listen, everybody, thank you. We will see you next Wednesday. Thank you, Ben. Love to Gigi.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.